Chapter 9. Win through your actions, never through argument. Any momentary triumph you think you have gained through argument is really Pyrrhic victory. The resentment and ill will you stir up is stronger and lasts longer than any momentary change of opinion. It is much more powerful to get others to agree with you through your actions without saying a word. Demonstrate, do not explicate. In 131 BC, the Roman consul Publius Carsus drives Meth, laying siege to the Greek town Pergamus, found himself in need of a battering ram to force through the town's walls. He had seen a couple of hefty ships massed in a shipyard in Athens a few days before, and he ordered that the larger of these be sent to him immediately. The military engineer in Athens, who received the order, felt certain that the council really wanted the smaller of the mast. He argued endlessly with the soldiers who delivered the request. The smaller mast, he told them, was much more better suited to task, and indeed it would be easier to transport. The soldiers warned the engineer that their master was not a man to argue with, but he insisted that the smaller mast would be the only one that would work with the machine that he was constructed to go with it. He drew his diagram after diagram and went so far as to ask that he was the expert and they had no clue what they were talking about. The soldiers knew their leader and at last convinced the engineer it would be better to swallow his expertise and obey. And after they left, though, the engineer thought about it with some more. What was the point, he asked himself, in obeying an order that would lead to failure? And so he sent his smallest mast, confident that the consul would see how much more effective it was and reward him justly. When the smaller mast arrived, Myrcus asked his soldiers for explanation. They described to him how the engineer had argued endlessly for the smaller mast, but had finally promised to send the larger one. Myrcus went into a rage. He could not concentrate on the siege or consider the importance of breaching the walls before the town received reinforcements. All he could think about was the impudent engineer whom he ordered to be brought to him immediately. Arriving a few days later, the engineer gladly explained to the council one more time the reasons for the small mast. He went on, using the same arguments that he had made with the soldiers. He said it was wise to listen to experts in these matters, and if the attack was only tried with the battering ram he had sent, the consul would not regret it. Myrcus let him finish, then had him stripped naked before the soldiers and flogged and scourged with rods until he died. The engineer, whose name has never not been recorded by history, had spent his life designing mast and pillar and was respected as the finest engineer in a city that had excelled in science. He knew that he was right. A smaller ram would allow more speed and carry more force. Larger is not necessarily better. Of course, the council would see his logic and would eventually understand the science in neutral reason superior. He could How could the consul possibly persist in his ignorance if the engineer showed him detailed diagrams and explained the theories behind his advice? The military engineer was the quintessence of the arguer, a type profound everywhere among us. The arguer does not understand that words are never neutral, and that by arguing with a superior, he impugns the intelligence of one more powerful than he. He also has no awareness of the person he is dealing with. Since each man believes he is right, and words will rarely convince him otherwise, the arguer reasons fall on deaf ears. When concerned, he only argues more, digging his own grave. Once he has made the other person feel insecure and inferior in his feelings, the eloquence of Socrates could not save the situation. It is not simply a question of avoiding an argument with those who stand above you. We believe we are masters in the realm of opinions and reasonings. You must be careful then. Learn to demonstrate the correctness of your ideas indirectly. In 1502, Florence, Italy, an enormous block of marble stood in the works department of the Church of Santa Maria di Fiore. It had once been a magnificent piece of raw stone, but an unskillful sculptor had mistakenly bored a hole through it where there should have been a figure's leg, generously mutilating it. Piero Soderini, Florence mayor, had contemplated trying to save the block by commissioning Leo da Vinci to work on it, or some other master, but had given up since everyone agreed that stone had been ruined. So despite the money that had been wasted on it, gathered dust in the dark halls of the church. This was where things stood until Florence friends of the great Michelangelo decided to write to the artist then living in Rome. He alone, they said, could do something with the marble, which was still magnificent raw material. Michelangelo traveled to Florence, examined the stone, and came to the conclusion that he could in fact carve a fine figure from it by adapting to pose the way the rock had been mutilated. Soderini argued that this was a waste of time. Nobody could salvage such a disaster, but he finally agreed to let the artist work on it. Michelangelo decided he would depict a young David, sling in hand. Weeks later, as Michelangelo was putting the final touches on the statue, Soderini entered the studio. Fancying himself a bit of connoisseur, he studied the huge work and told Michelangelo that while he thought it was magnificent, the nose he judged was too big. Michelangelo realized that Soderini was standing in a place right under the giant's figure and did not have the proper perspective. Without a word, he gestured for Soderini to follow him up to the scaffoldings. Reaching the nose, he picked up his chisel, as well as a bit of marble dust, laid on the planks, with Soderini's just a few feet below him on the scaffolding. Michelangelo started to tap lightly with a chisel, letting the bits of dust he had gathered in his hands to fall little by little. He actually did nothing to change the nose, but gave every appearance of working on it. After a few minutes of this charade, he stood aside. "Look at it now," I like it better, replied Sardinini. You've made it come alive. Michelangelo knew by changing the shape of the nose, he might ruin the sculpture, the entire sculpture. Yet, Sordini was a patron who prided himself on his aesthetic judgment. To offend such a man by arguing would not only gain Michelangelo's nothing, it would put future commissions in jeopardy. Michelangelo was too clever to argue. His solution was to change Sordini's perspective, literally bringing him closer to the nose, without making him realize that that was the cause of his misperception. Fortunately for his posterity, Michelangelo found a way to keep the perfection of the statue intact while at the same time making Sordini believe he had improved it. Such is the double power of winning through actions rather than argument. No one is offended and your point is proven. In the realm of power, you must learn to judge your moves by their long-term effects on other people. The problem in trying to prove a point or gain a victory through argument is that in every end you can never The problem in trying to prove a point or gain a victory through argument is that in the end you can never be certain how it affects the people you're arguing with. They may appear to agree with you politely, but inside they may resent you. Or perhaps sometimes you said inadvertently even offend them. Words have their insidious ability to be interpreted according to the other person's mood and insecurities. Even the best argument has no solid foundation, for we have all come to distrust the slippery nature of words. And days after agreeing with someone, we often revert to our old opinions of sheer habit. Understand this, words are a dime a dozen. Everyone knows that the heat of an argument, we will all say something to support our cause. We will quote the Bible, refer to unverifiable statistics. We can be persuaded by bags of air like that. Action and demonstration are much more powerful and meaningful. They are there before our eyes for us to see. Yes, now that statue's nose does not look just right, there are no offensive words, no possibility of misinterpretation. No one can argue with demonstrated proof. As Baltar G. remarks, the truth is generally seen, rarely heard. Sir Christopher Wren was England's version of Renaissance man. He had mastered the science of mathematics, astronomy, physics, and psychology. Yet during his extremely long career as England's most celebrated architect, he had often told his patrons to make impractical changes in his designs. Never once did he argue or offend. He had other ways of proving his point. In 1688, Wren designed a magnificent town hall for the city of Westminster. The mayor, however, was not satisfied. In fact, he was nervous. He told Wren he was afraid the second floor was not secure and that it could all come crashing down on his office on the first floor. He demanded that Wren add 2 stone columns for extra support. Wren, the consummate engineer, knew that these columns would serve no purpose and that Mayor's fears were baseless. But Build them he did, and the mayor was grateful. It was only years later that the workmen on a high scaffold saw that the columns stopped just short of the ceiling. They were dummies, but both men got what they wanted. The mayor could relax, and the Wren knew posterity would understand his original design worked, and the columns were unnecessary. The power of demonstrating your idea is that your opponent do not get defensive and therefore more open to persuasion. Making them literally and physically feel your meaning is infinitely more powerful than argument. A heckler once interrupted Nikita K in the middle of a speech in which he was denouncing the crimes of Stalin. "You were a colleague of Stalin's," the heckler yelled. "Why didn't you stop him then?" K apparently could not see the heckler and barked out, "Who said that?" No hand went up. No one moved a muscle. After a few seconds of tense silence, K finally said in a quiet quote, "Now you know why I didn't stop him." Instead of just arguing with anyone, facing Stalin was afraid, knowing that the slightest sigh of rebellion would mean certain death. He had made them feel what it was like to face Stalin, had made them feel the paranoia, the fear of speaking up, the terror of confronting the leader. In this case, K. The demonstration was visceral and no more argument was necessary. The more powerful persuasion goes beyond action into symbol. The power of a symbol, a flag, a mystic story, a monument to some emotional event is that everyone understands you without anything being said. In 1975, when Henry Kissinger was engaged in some frustrating negotiations with Israel over the return of part of the Sinai Desert that they had seized in 1967 war, he suddenly broke off a tense meeting and decided to do some sightseeing. He paid a visit to the ruins of the ancient fortress of Masada, known to all as Israelis. As the place where 700 Jewish warriors committed mass suicide in AD 73, rather than give in to Roman troops besieging them. The Israelis instantly understood the message of King Kissinger's visit. He was indirectly accusing them of courting mass suicide. Although the visit did not by itself change their minds, it made them think far more seriously than any different warning would have. Symbols like this one carry great emotional significance. When aiming for power and trying to conserve it, always look for the indirect route. And always choose your battles carefully. If it does not matter in the long run whether the other person agrees with you or if time and their own experience will make them understand what you mean, then it is best not to even bother with a demonstration. Save your energy and walk away. Verbal arguments has one vital use in the realm of power: to distract and cover your tracks when you are practicing deception or caught in a lie. In such cases, it is to your advantage to argue with all the conviction you can muster. Draw the other person into an argument to distract them from your deceptive move. When caught in a lie, the more emotional and certain you appear, the less likely it seems that you are lying. Oh my goodness. This technique has saved the hide of many con artists. Once Count Victor Lustig, a swindler par excellence, had sold dozens of suckers around the country a phony box, which he claimed to be able to copy money. Discovering their mistake, the suckers generally chose not to go to the police rather than risk the embarrassment of publicity. But one Sheriff Richards of Remsen County, Oklahoma, was not the kind of man to accept being conned out of $10,000. And one morning, he tracked Lustig down to a hotel in Chicago. Lustig heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, he was looking down the barrel of a gun. "What seems to be the problem?" he calmly asked. "You son of a bitch," yelled the sheriff. "I'm going to kill you. You conned me with that damn box of yours." Lustig, firing confusion. "You mean it's not working?" he asked. "You know it's not working," replied the sheriff. "But that's impossible," said Lustig. "There's no way it could be not working. Did you operate it properly?" "I did exactly what you told me to do," said the sheriff. "No, you must have done something wrong," said Lustig. The argument went in circles. The barrel of the gun was gently lowered. Lustig next went to phase 2 in the argument tactic. He poured out a whole bunch of technical googled gook about the book's operation, completely beguiled the sheriff, who now appeared less sure of himself and argued less forcibly. "Look," said Lustig, "I'll give you your money back right now, and I'll also give you a written instructions on how to work the machine, and I'll come to Oklahoma to make sure it works properly. There's no way you can lose on that." The sheriff reluctantly agreed. To satisfy him totally, Lustig took out $100 and $100 bills and gave them to him, telling him to relax and have a fun weekend in Chicago. Calmer and a little confused, the sheriff finally left. Over the next few days, Lustig checked the paper every morning. He finally found what he was looking for. A short article reporting Sheriff Richards' arrest, trial, and conviction of passing counterfeit notes. Lustig had won the argument. The sheriff never bothered him again.